Welcome back to episode 99 of the Football Fitness Federation podcast. I'm delighted today to be joined by Dawn Scott. Dawn is somebody that every time we ask for recommendations, your name, Dawn, has come up time and time again. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
No worries, I'm flattered. I'm good I didn't make the 100 though.
I know, very close. Just one away. But I'm sure a lot of people know your role, Dawn, England Senior Women's Physical Performance Manager. But do you want to just take us back? Because I know a lot of people will know the roles that you've had so far and your current role, but do you want to just give us a little bit of background and take us up to your current role?
Yeah, no problems. Yeah. So I started out many years ago, back when education was, you basically didn't have to kind of fund your education. So I actually started a physics degree way back in 1993 at Nottingham University. Because I wasn't sure, it kind of came to the end of school, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Really enjoyed I did maths, physics, electronics as my A-levels. Really enjoyed physics, so kind of went to Nottingham, did physics, started a physics degree. After my first year, started the second year, was sat in an astronomy kind of module, and I guess at that time was kind of then starting to review, like, where is this going to take me? I'm not sure I want to be an astronaut. Like, where do I want to go next? And again, with my dad's help, found kind of a loophole. So I pulled out of the course and actually worked for a year. And I actually worked as a VDU operator, as they called us, a visual display unit, which was literally tapping on a keyboard, which actually, in hindsight, when I went back to university, really helped in terms of being able to type up assignments quickly when I did go back to university. And then I went to Manchester Metropolitan, which was Crunel Sager faculty at the time, and did a sports science degree. Again, before I'd gone to Nottingham, I'd when you kind of decide which universities, colleges that you might want to go to and which subjects, I'd only put sports science down at one, and ironically it was at Liverpool John Moores, which I think was Liverpool Polytechnic at the time. But again, wasn't sure that sports science was really a route, a career path to go down. So in the end, went for the physics, but actually got back to the sports science in the end. So did sports science degree at Manchester Met. Finished that summer. Again, wasn't sure where to go next. There wasn't really many jobs in sports science at that time. Seen advertised on the notice board a master's in sports nutrition up at Aberdeen University, and it was a funded master's. So myself and a friend who'd finished the course were like, okay, let's apply and go there, and we can add like top up kind of the sports science degree. So went and did the sports nutrition masters in Aberdeen with Ron Warren and Susan Shireft and John Leaper, who was up there. So again, that was a great learning experience as well. Finished that, started kind of looking at again what jobs were there, and then was lucky enough a lecturing job came up at Worcester University. So I was there for 3.5 years lecturing sports science. And then towards the end of that time, the FA advertised they were expanding their sports science department. And actually somebody I worked with, her husband was a sports scientist at the FA, Mark Hulse. So I applied for the FA job and got interviewed and was fortunate to get it. They'd expanded so that they were supporting their men's and women's pathways with sports scientists and medical team. So I got the job at the FA, was in a department with the likes of Tony Strudwick, Sam Erith, Rich Hawkins, Rob Price, who's at Leeds as physio. So kind of was there for 9 years. Again, with the women's team, started a kind of sports science support program from the start, because there was nothing in place previously. Again, sports science in the men's game was new and was pretty much non-existent on the women's side. Also at the time, on the women's side, they were full-time careers first and would top up their training after their jobs, and train with their clubs probably 2 or 3 times a week. So it very much was monitoring currently what they were doing, starting to look at the demands of match play for club, for international, developing programs to basically get the players fitter, supplying them with heart rate watchers to start monitoring that training and program for the players away from camp, but monitoring those loads in camp, starting education around nutrition, hydration, recovery, lifestyle. And then through that pathway, was lucky to be part of, we hosted the European Championships in 2005 and then qualified for the World Cup in 2007, where we got beaten in the quarterfinals. And then in 2009, European Championships, which were in Finland, we got to the final of that and got beat by Germany in the final, which, you know, it was a measure of how far we'd come, but still we got beat 6-2 in the final by Germany, who'd, I think that was their third or fourth successive European Championship win. So it was like a measure of how far we come, but still how far that gap was between us and the best teams in the world. And then towards the end of 2009 was approached by US Soccer for the US women's national team. They had never had a full-time sports scientist. They won the Beijing Olympics in 2008, but then hadn't had a sports scientist since then. So if I'm honest, the head coach would do any fitness testing in camp and that kind of thing. So then got offered a role and moved out there in 2010. Just packed up a couple of cases and off I went. So then was at US Soccer from 2010 to 2019. With that team, supported them across 3 World Cup finals, 2 Olympic Games, traveled probably 150 to 200 days a year for 10 years. And then accumulated in, you know, we won the World Cup last summer. And, you know, after that, we'd been to all 3 World Cup finals, got beaten the 2011 final and then won the 15 and 19. And again, after the World Cup, it was, you know, just reviewing a little bit. If I'm honest, I think I was exhausted from the accumulation of the travel of the 9 or 10 years, reviewing the position a little bit, kind of couple of conversations with US Soccer about, you know, could the role expand and could we apply some of the work we've done with the senior women across the pathway? But that role kind of wasn't something that was available at that time. And then at the same time, the FA had reached out, Phil had reached out, and Sue Campbell, and you know, they kind of told me about the exciting opportunity with the England women's team, where, you know, part of the FA's aim is to win something for a senior team by 2023. And again, you know, England came very close last summer. You know, I watched the game from a different lens a couple of months ago when it was on the TV. Obviously, back last summer, I was on the US bench. I watched it kind of from the England lens, and, you know, Kira Walsh had a shot that was saved, and there was a penalty save, and, you know, for those things being reversed, it could have been a different story. So, you know, England are extremely close, but it's exciting that, you know, there's so much support behind the team, and you know, the players badly want it, and, you know, I think they're in a position where they can win something, and we can win something in the next 2 or 3 years. So I was offered that opportunity at the end of last year and kind of made the switch back to England, and back to family as well.
It must be a really exciting time to step in with that squad right now, because, like you say, some of the talent they've got available is brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. I mean, like I say, they came close last summer, and I mean, they've got obviously a kind of more senior group of players, but a really exciting group of younger players coming through. There's a couple of players from the under-19s who are playing at college in the US, and also just like how strong the WSL is right now, and the commitment of the teams there to you know, make their environments and make their teams even better, I think can only kind of help the England environment as well, in terms of developing those players at clubs, because that's where they are the majority of the time throughout the year, so that then when they come in with England, you know, they're kind of even more developed than they have been in the past.
Yeah, definitely. And I said to you before we started recording, Dawn, that we've had a lot of messages now from young practitioners, so practitioners that are post-grad or even still going through degrees, and a lot of female practitioners as well that are reaching out and saying, can you get someone on the podcast to talk about the challenges that females faced in sport in general, but obviously S&C sports science, and obviously there's no one better to come on to talk about that than yourself. And And these are some of the people that have asked you to come on, asked to get you on the podcast as well. So I thought it'd be great to delve into this. So you've talked about your career and obviously your journey so far, but what have been some of the challenges you faced?
I mean, I think first and foremost, I think sometimes when you're in it, you don't maybe see it. And I think when you then reflect, it kind of, some of it resonates and makes more sense. And, I think one of the biggest challenges is being kind of a female, having a career in sport. I listened to the podcast that Rob Pacey did a couple of weeks ago with Sophia Nymphius and Lorena Torres, who's a high performance director at the Philadelphia 76ers. And a lot of what they said resonated about being a female in a sporting environment. And I think some of that, is around very much the sporting arena has been and is male dominated. And that's everything from the athletes, the coaches, and the high performance and the practitioners. And I think you can look at kind of like different facets or different areas where, is it a female working in the male arena? Is it female and female? And kind of what are the ratios of some of those kind of numbers? And I think in terms of kind of the athlete side, I think, I kind of did a little bit of research. And if you looked at the Olympics, I think it was back in 1964, only 13% of the athletes at the Olympic Games were female, were women. And actually it was going to be, this year was the highest ever proportion of female athletes, which it was going to go up to 48%. So it was almost an identical kind of male-female ratio. So I think that in part is some of it. You look at the women's game, like they've just produced the FA game plan for growth, where female participation is up almost 54% over the last 10 years to almost 2.5 million females now playing football. When I look back to when I was growing up, like I would go out in the street and play football with the boys at school. I only ever played netball. Like again, at primary school, it was netball, or it was or rounders probably, or no sport. There was never any football at school. But being a girl growing up that time, like you didn't even realize that there wasn't anything formal or organized for girls. It was literally, I'd get home from school, do your homework, and then go out and just play football with the boys, put the jumpers down and probably play till dark. And again, if I think about playing netball at school, like if you then get home and you wanted to go play netball, you couldn't because there's no netball posts. But what was accessible was actually just to go out and kick a ball. And then like I got to like 13, 14 and, like I really enjoyed football and wanted to play for a team, but had no clue where there was any teams that I could actually go and play for. So my mum actually called up a radio station to say, I've got a daughter who loves football. Like, are there any local teams? And a team got in touch, but we didn't have a car at the time, and it was 2 bus journeys away, and you're 14, you're at school, and you just couldn't do that kind of 2 times a week. And then it was full day on a Sunday, so that was hard to do that. And it actually wasn't until I went to university at 18 that I had the opportunity to play football in a formalized, be coached, and actually play for a team in an official match. So I think in some ways you start then reflecting a bit and actually think, well, yeah, it was very much male dominated, and there was an opportunity for girls to play. And I even listened to a podcast that Kelly Smith, probably the greatest player England's ever had, and when she was growing up, it was the same. There was no opportunities for her to play, and she played for a boys team, and then another parent spotted that she was a girl, and she got kind of taken out of the game, and they said she couldn't play. So I think we've evolved and changed so much, because you look at whatever 2.5 million females now playing, so there are more opportunities. I think you then look at, say, the coaches side. I think there's less probably information available in terms of how many S&C coaches or sports scientists, but you look at coaches alone, and if I look at, say, the WSL, the women's league over here, 6 of the 12 WSL teams are female coaches. You look in the NWSL, so the equivalent league in America, and only 1 of the 9 teams is a female head coach. I think you look at the women's national teams around the world, and only 20% of those teams have a female head coach. it's quite ironic that the final last year, actually both teams were female head coaches. Do you know what I mean? So it's, so I think some of it is, you know, part sport is a very much kind of male dominated arena. Even the NCAA, you know, the college system in the US, it's similar where, you know, there's a dominance of male head coaches. And I think if you then look at the sports that do have female head coaches, they tend to be more of the feminine sports. So like field hockey, lacrosse, gymnastics, whereas some of the, if you like, kind of more masculine or typically male dominated sports like soccer have males as their head coaches. And then I think it's similar again if I look at, say, the women's league here in England and the US. Again, in England I think 3 of 12 of the women's teams over here have a female as their sports scientist, head sports scientist. And similar in the US, I think it's 2 of 9 are kind of female. So, you know, I think part of it is that it's a male dominated arena, and it, you know, at times it is hard to break into it. And I think as well, you know, sometimes I've looked at a job and it's a job in a male sport, and I've looked at it and thought, am I good enough to do that? And I think some of that then resonates in that, you know, that's silly. You shouldn't have the doubts that you can work in a male sport if you've been successful or you've worked with female athletes, because the underlying you know, kind of principles of what you're doing is very same. You're just applying it to a different arena. And then I think, you know, some of the other things I've kind of faced in the past is, you know, sexist or kind of gender comments or banter. And you know, like way back, probably more like 10-15 years ago, would be comments about, you know, should women be playing football and that kind of thing. And, you know, there's still stuff like that on social media. And, you know, some of it is when it's there face to face and you're receiving it, if you join in and, you know, have that, if you want to call it banter or have that conversation, that dialogue back, it can get quite nasty and you know, that kind of thing, and unpleasant, or you ignore it and you get accused of being kind of moody and like, you know, she's upset kind of thing. So, you know, I think that can be hard to kind of tolerate and face sometimes. And then, you know, I think that the last piece as well, and this is probably society generally, I think females who are in the sporting arena or, you know, kind of different kinds of kind of roles, I think tend to not be in those positions, like those senior positions. So it's almost positions that are kind of lower ranked with less decision making, you know, less control of budgets, less opportunity to maybe recruit staff, and that kind of thing. And, you know, I think linked into that is probably lower salary as well, whether it is the females in as a practitioner or females working in female sport. So, you know, I think all of that sometimes is something that is challenging. I think some of it because of the people you've had around you, like, you know, whether it's the supporters around you, your family around you, you know. And also I'm quite a resilient person that, you know, some of it you can brush off and push through. You know, I also have experiences of teaching on coaching licenses where you walk in the room and every single coach in there is male. And I've had it, you know, I've had it where I've walked in and you've visibly seen it, where the coach has looked at you and like either like mouthed like what is she going to teach us, or like made a comment to their male coach next to them and laughed. And you know, some of those were hard. And, you know, I remember at the time having to build myself up to go in the room and almost self-talk that you are good enough to deliver this, you know how to deliver this, you can do this. And, you know, it was then satisfying that you would go in, and a lot of those coaching courses, there would be kind of an element in the classroom where you deliver some theory, and then you go out on the pitch and deliver that piece as well, you know, building out like warm-ups or like football specific, you know, speed drills and conditioning sessions. And, you know, you'd go out and you deliver it. And, you know, again, at the time you'd have coaches come up after and thank you. You'd have coaches come up and go, oh, wow, like, you know your stuff. And yes, that's nice feedback, but it's also a bit patronizing. Like, would you say to a male S&C person delivering that, oh, wow, you know your stuff? You know, there was also an incident where a coach had famously in the media said a comment about women should stay in the kitchen. And this one course I was delivering, this coach happened to be on the course, and at the end of it, he came up to me and said, thank you, I really enjoyed it, I learned a lot. And I just retorted, does that mean women can come out the kitchen now? And I think so some of that is, you have to be strong at times, you have to really believe in yourself that you can do this. You also have to be like sometimes overperform. Like, if it was me and a male sports scientist delivering the course, like, you always feel like you have to do a better job than them. Or if ever I'm invited to present at a conference or speak on a podcast, you feel like you have to do a better job than the equivalent male, because you're almost like representing the female kind of population. Mm-hmm. So, I think some of it you experience and you bury it, or you face it. Some of it you just expect it's the norm, and kind of get on with it, and just kind of push on, and are so driven, like I said, I'm resilient and driven, that you're not going to let something like that affect you.
I think these are conversations that have to occur, aren't they? Because I know you mentioned Rob's podcast that he did, and if anyone's not listened to it, go and listen to it, and listen to it a few times, because there's so many takeaways from it. And I know you just referenced a few bits from it in what you talked about there, Dawn. And I think it's so important. But that resilience, that I suppose the worry with it is that, like you said yourself, you go into those environments, you come out of it, and it is a test, but you're resilient, you get through it. And obviously you have with your career. But the worry is that other people that could be just as good a practitioner may not be able to cope in that environment. And that's not what we want, because then we'll lose quality practitioners out of the game, won't we? So how do we go about this? I know it's a tough question, because it's a changing culture, but what's the answer, do you think? What do we need to change?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely a difficult, conversation, to have. I think there's a few parts of that. I think generally, as a system, as a structure, as society, we have to do better. And I think is that part of that is making it an appealing environment for women, for females to want to, pursue something in that area. I know I kind of read something that Formula One a couple of years ago identified that they had minimal number of women on staff, and so they actually made a drive to recruit more women in senior roles, to make it more appealing, to promote in schools that there is a career in Formula One. So I think as a society, as a structure, as national governing bodies, I think like doing those things, like making it showing role models of women practitioners, female practitioners, females in different roles who have achieved, so that the girl at school can see that it is possible. And at times, again, like when I get asked to do things like this, some of it is exactly about that, is about exposing that females can be in positions and work with the elite athletes in the world. It's not about Dawn Scott, it's about promoting that women can be in these positions. And when I was in the US, I was part of a program called Women in STEM, which is women in science, technology, engineering and maths. And that was all about, there's a very low percentage of females who pursue careers in STEM. And they've done a nice thing where they've now developed this, it's called If Then collection of women in STEM, where there's resources that schools, libraries, museums can go on and can download, whether it's posters, images, or like sound bites of females who have achieved in all range of, it's not just, in sports science, it's in all kind of those STEM careers. So, I think as society, making those things available, promoting females so that the girl at school can see it is a viable route. Again, if a girl has a passion for sport but is not an athlete, there's still other ways of being in sport, whether it is a coach, whether it's admin, whether it's sports science, whether it's an analyst, so there are those roles. Again, I think as organizations or societies, making it a non-threatening environment for females, whether that's a mentoring process, whether that's putting on female-only courses, or, setting up kind of female mentors for females. And, as much as I promote and support that. I'm not somebody who also says it's only women who should work in women's sport, because I'm very much, it's about the best person. But I think we also need to promote women in sport, because some of those numbers of the few females who do work in sport are pretty shocking. Um, and then I think the last piece is women. As much as we need those like structures or organizations to promote those pieces, I think it's also about you yourself being driven to seek out those opportunities. Like I gave that example of, sometimes, you know, you've looked at a job in the past and I've gone, well, no, it's in kind of a male sport or a male environment and I'm not good enough to do it. Well, believe in yourself. If you tick all of the qualifications, if you tick, you know, the experience and those side of things, you've got just as much right to apply for it as the next male next to you. So, you know, I think as females, like, seek those out. I think as females, be brave. Again, if you're a female who is lacking in that kind of confidence or esteem, like, reach out to other female practitioners or get yourself a mentor. Again, when I was starting out my career, there was no you know, female mentors in my field, and probably some of my mentors, and probably still are probably males, and probably some of those people I mentioned who I first worked with at the FA. But they also valued me for me, and not, you know, didn't judge me based on gender. So yeah, so I think it's about seeking those opportunities, being brave, you know, being resilient, believing in yourself. You do have to have a little bit of, you know, kind of resilience. I think the flip side, I'd say, for male practitioners, and again, Sophia, you know, who I know very well, Nymphia, said it about, you know, if you are a male practitioner or male coach, like, take the time to have a conversation with a female coach and ask questions about their journeys, about their experiences. Like, don't be afraid to be a support network, be a mentor for females. Equally, you know, in the US, like I said, Lorena Torres in the NBA, I think, is the only female high performance director in the NBA. If you're a male, reach out to Lorena, because it should work both ways. Like, she's not, you know, she's not in that position for any other reason other than she's good enough to be there, and, you know, and so on. So, you know, I think there's a few things we can do ourselves. I think society, and then I think, you know, awareness of other people to make it a non-threatening environment for females who might want to kind of pursue careers in those fields.
100%. I think that was my biggest takeaway from that podcast as well, was the fact of encouraging conversations and understanding as well from both sides, isn't it? That that's what the conversations should do. They should be open enough to sort of understand what's going on, because, and again, I'll reference the podcast, but people need to go and listen to it, and listen to it carefully, because there's some great discussions, and Dawn's touched on it and expanding a lot of points here, but I do encourage people to go and listen. But I think one of the important things is being truthful to these practitioners that are coming through in terms of the challenges they may face going ahead. But like what you just mentioned there, is the fact that they've got to go and create opportunities as well. So if I put it to you, Dawn, and say, knowing your career path and some of the things that you face, what would your advice be going back to your younger self and some of the things that you'd have to face going through your career?
Oh, that's a great question.
I've just dumped that on you as well, haven't I? I didn't prepare you for that. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, if I kind of look back, again, I'm old. I started out like 20 years ago at the FA, and, you know, I think I was also, I was qualified. I was also fortunate that at the time the FA was expanding and sports science was a new field, especially in the realms of women's football. And at that time there was probably very few, and I'm probably going to put it the other way now, and there was probably very few females who had football experience, knowledge, interest, and the sports science qualification. And so probably in the other way, I was probably in part successful because I was a female at the time, and the FA were expanding to support their women's side. So, you know, I think some of it, but also when I was at college at Worcester University, myself and two colleagues there, we all had an interest in football. and we travelled around to all. I think there was 9 or 10 women's Premier teams at the time. They were amateur, but we travelled. We were based in Worcester, and there were teams in like Southampton. I think Leeds United might have been the most northern team, but we do our kind of day lecturing, and then the teams would be training like 7 till 9 at night. And we drove out to the teams to do fitness testing, like dietary recall, a bit of nutrition analysis. And then with one team, Southampton Saints, and Vanessa Rainbird, who was there at the time, I kind of continued that support and actually started programming for the players and just doing testing on a more regular basis. So kind of got some hands-on experience. It was voluntary. I would literally drive up and down and deliver a bit of education and then deliver the program. So, kind of one thing I would say is get that experience, get that hands-on experience, because I don't think any degree course teaches you for what that is in terms of relationships with coaches, relationships with players, relationships with the whole staff around the team. And, you look at support staff around teams now, and at the last World Cup, I think US soccer had 27 staff members, and I believe England was very similar. And you have the MDT around the team. It's a much bigger process than 20 years ago. So I think it's hard because I think society has changed now. And I kind of look at my path, and I feel like I was fortunate in many ways in how I got into it and how I could grow into that role. And that's why I would say now, get as much hands-on experience as you can, even in a voluntary capacity, as you are going through your education, your degree, so that when you come out, if it's you against somebody else who's just qualified, you've got like a step ahead of them already in terms of having a bit of experience, kind of hands-on working with a team. Because for me, nothing beats that interaction with the players and the coaches, and how you manage that and how you work with different coaches, different players. Because I don't know how many coaches I've worked with now, maybe 7 or 8 coaches, and they all work differently. They all communicate differently. They all want data displayed in different ways. They all value the data in different degrees. I've worked with, I don't know, hundreds of players, and they all learn differently. They all want data presented differently. They all have different physical profiles. So I think as much as you can, getting some of that experience, so that if and when you're chasing after that dream job, you've got some experience, and you've got those communication and relationship and a little bit of leadership skills behind you to kind of go into that realm.
Definitely. And that's something we spoke about a lot on the podcast in terms of taking and creating these opportunities, because there's so many teams and players out there that are dying to be worked with, aren't there? And it's just a case of going seeking them. And you learn so much, don't you, from being in that environment. And I was speaking to someone just this morning about working with a Sunday League team, and they were saying about all the problems they've been having. They don't listen, all this sort of stuff. And I was like, but you don't realize the skill set that that's creating. If you can get any work done in that environment, then when you move on and up the levels, then it's going to help massively, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And like you say, you could get experience at grassroots, male, female, different levels, amateur, semi-pro, professional. Yeah, absolutely. For me, I think the more experience and diversity in terms of different groups you can work with, I think the bigger your profile. And I think the more you learn, like, your education, your course, I know they have more kind of hands-on in some of those modules and courses now than back when I studied, but still, I just think experiencing that yourself hands-on and doing it in a voluntary capacity where you're on your own as well, and suddenly you have to deal with everything, and you have to deal with, like you throw me the sideswipe with a question, you suddenly got to deal with something you're not expecting, and how do you react to that? Because you have to have a front to the players and the coaches that you're not being affected, and that you can still function for the players and the staff group and the coach.
No, definitely. And I'll get back onto what we agreed now done. Back to the schedule. But
I'm nervous now.
No, I wanted to go, one thing that we said we're going to touch on is, and the last World Cup, I mean, the buzz around the World Cup and the games, the quality of the games was, I thought it was incredible. I think it was a brilliant watch and some fantastic games. Now, off the back of that, there's obviously been the report that's come out, the FIFA report, and I know you've been heavily involved in that, and as like we were talking about before, Paul Bradley, and I'm sure many others as well. And I was just having a little flick through it before, and obviously people can go and have a look on the FIFA website and see the report. But what were some of the biggest takeaways? Because reading through it, I think it just defined what you saw, didn't it? But as a practitioner in your role, what were some of the key things that stood out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate that FIFA asked me and alongside Paul Bradley to work on the report. And again, I'd also done the 2015 report. So I think there was a few things. I think this report we could really delve into a lot more detail. We had a full data set in 2015. Some of the data was missing. So I think we'd learned a bit in 15. And so this was a fuller data set. You know, some of the biggest things that came out of it was there was like 30 to 50% increases in the amount of high speed kind of running distances, efforts that teams either did, individual players did. Also, if you looked at the lower ranked teams, their increases from 2015 to 19 were much more substantial than the higher ranked teams, which again for me was a reflection of the increased funding globally, the increased professionalism in the women's game, that players, countries now are in kind of more professional environments, training environments. They have better support in terms of like strength and conditioning, sports science. They have better medical support. So I think some of it was a reflection of that. Again, if you kind of split to the kind of high speed running and the sprint distance tended to increase the highest, both on a team level and individual players. From a positional perspective, there was a massive range of how much of that high speed output players did. And again, kind of Paul did a great reflection with a heat map. We pulled out like a few different positions, and it was just showing like a key example was a fullback where their actual output in terms of high speed running was very similar across two games. But when you heat mapped it, one of it was up in the attacking third of the pitch and the other was more defensive, and it was kind of running back towards your own goal. So again, it was like, you know, I think this time a bit with Paul's expertise and, you know, his research profile was then pulling out more of the contextual factors of, okay, like this is the physical output, but actually what is going on from a contextual perspective. And, you know, on the team level, we could look at number of days between matches, we could look at the round of the matches, we could look at the confederation, we looked a bit at the ranking. So again, it was kind of putting some of those factors into it to see how that affected it. And then from a positional level, actually, if you looked at the heat map and the direction of the movement, what were players actually doing in terms of making it more relevant and actually giving that feedback to the coaches in terms of this is what we're seeing, and you know, this is how it links into the tactics or the formation of your own team, the opposing team. Like for three of our games, obviously I was with the US then, in the second half, the coach changed to a 5-back because we were winning and we wanted to control the game. And so straight away your high speed running decreases because you almost kind of sat in. So again, you know, when we looked at like first, we could look at 15-minute intervals, 45-minute intervals. And so for the US, second half in three of those matches, actually the high speed decreased. But I then looked at kind of England's, and for their first 6 matches, their high speed outputs either increased or was the same. And again, that almost reflected the games in that if they were comfortable and winning, they could kind of sit on and hold it. But if they needed to push, you know, the US game was an example where I think they had a 15% increase from first half to second half, and they were chasing to try and get that second goal. So again, we also looked at like the shape of teams in terms of where was the defensive line, what was the height of the line, how did that impact like when the high speed running was done, and things like that. So it was really trying to put a lot more like contextual information on it to really make it user friendly for the coaches, so that they could look at it and think, okay, like, wow, this is my team and this is where they sit in the whole like realm of the rest of the world. But, you know, also the US, as you might expect, didn't do the most high speed output because again, it was what they needed to do for each game. And the highest output for the US was in our third group game against Sweden, and similar for Sweden, their highest high-speed output in that game was against us. And historically, the US have always had Sweden. I think we didn't have. Well, we played them. They beat us in the 2016 Olympics, but we've always had them in the group stages in the 11, 15, and 19 World Cup. So it's kind of one of those physical battles. So that was our highest output. But I think the point and the whole theme throughout the report was making it contextual, and that it's not just about the physical data. You need to look at the tactics, the formation, the game outcome, because at the end of the day, that's the most important piece. But for me, it's just the women's game's just exciting. And, even after that tournament, Gianni Infantino, the FIFA president, committed $1 billion to women's football over the next 4 years, which, again, is incredible to continue to push on and grow the game. And at this tournament, I think there was 28 teams, and next tournament there's going to be 32. So again, just kind of continuing to kind of push that, is important. And there was even something recently where the NWSL, the Women's Pro League in the US, they've just had their tournament out in Houston. And the North Carolina coach, which, kind of historically, they've got some of the better athletes on their team. And, he just posted out a message that over 50% of his squad are hitting between 30 and 32 and 34 kilometers per hour as their top speed. So I think that also was reflected in the World Cup, in that, for me, the game has got so much faster. And again, even with the US team, probably 4 or 5 years ago, we probably had a third of the team who weren't hitting 30 kilometers per hour. And, by the time of the World Cup, every player was comfortably over 30 kilometers per hour as their top speed. So, I think from that piece, that's just a measure again of how far the women's game's gone. And I think from a spectacle, you see it. Like, you look back at footage of 2011, even 15, and now 19, and, just the pace of it, the athleticism, in the game, the quality of the football as well is, I think it's just growing. And you just think, where's it going to be at 2023? I think it's so exciting.
No, definitely. And I think some of the couple of things that I saw, and it was the increase in the build-up play, so keeping the ball better, and then the increase on the pressing of teams as well. So with that in your role, how was that, or how will that sort of tweak how you prepare players? Because obviously the game's becoming a lot more powerful. Like you said, there's going to be more higher speeds, and we don't know where it's going to go over the next few years, but if it's going to follow the same trend, it's going to get faster. Yep. It's going to get much more exciting. So how does that tweak, or does it tweak how you prepare players?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a practitioner, you always look at, what are we preparing our players for? And ultimately that is those match demands. Obviously you've got, kind of the England match demands, and then, they've got their WSL matches as well, or NWSL. We've got a couple of players in America, and then a couple of players, Leon and a player in Spain. So again, it's, what are the match demands for the player? What we're preparing the players to do. And then for me, using that as a basis of, what does your training look like, and are you preparing the players to match and hit what those kind of high speed outputs are. Again, with the FA, they Rich Aikenhead at the FA has done a lot of analysis around kind of game pace training, where you look at 30-second, 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute, right down to 10-minute kind of peak periods, and what do the meters per minute look like? What do the accelerations, decelerations per minute look like? What does the high speed running per minute look like for each of those periods? And again, just making sure that players hit some of that exposure in the lead up to an international match, so that when they come to the England match, they're not suddenly surprised at the pace of what that is. So I think always using that as your end point. Your start point is, what are their current physical profile? What's their fitness? And for me, I think, yes, you have those metrics in terms of satisfying them to match the match demands. But I think from developing the player's fitness, I think it's just using your basic physiological principles for, developing all of those fitness parameters, whether it's, your endurance, your strength, your power, your speed. And If you've got players who do need to do a bit more than others, then, what does that look like and how is that individualized for them? And, just looking at the individual player and what are they doing off the pitch? Like, they could be the best trainer in the world, but what is this other 22 hours looking like? What's their nutrition, their hydration, their recovery? Because ultimately, if they're not getting that right, then what they're doing on the pitch is not going to be optimal and get them to where they need to be.
No, definitely. And I think the other thing that the report and some of the things that you spoke about in terms of the report shows that the opportunities are going to be there as well, aren't they, for female coaches, with the female game growing at the very top in terms of the World Cup. More teams being involved, like you said, and more need for this physicality and athleticism, and there's going to be more opportunities, surely. So everything we've talked about beforehand sort of ties in with this report as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And even, again, I think we touched on that of kind of the opportunities growing. I think even, it would be good at some point if a female breaks into the men's professional game as a head coach. Even MLS in the US, there's no female head coaches. Obviously in UK there isn't. I think there was one just recently in Sweden, maybe the first female head coach of a pro team. So I think that would be obviously something groundbreaking as well. But then equally, the women's game expand, and yes, opportunities for female coaches, but just opportunity for coaches generally in terms of making sure you get the best person for the job. And even within that coaching group, having some female presence in there, and whether it's a mentorship opportunity or just a coaching opportunity again within that coaching team.
Definitely. And it's like what we said about before, isn't it? Having that network of coaches that you can reach out to, because mentors and people that are within those roles. And like you said, on the male side as well, we spoke about some names that are involved, some females that are involved in the male side. And that's what you want to see grow as well, isn't it? To not just separate that you work on the female side and you work on the male side. You want people to delve into both opportunities, and hopefully if there can be networks created, and I'm sure you'll agree with young practitioners, that's what you need to be creating. You need to be creating your network and reaching out to people, and that's going to lead to opportunities for yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's where I say it's almost like double-edged in that, yes, as society and sport and NGBs and individual clubs, we need to be better, but equally, you need to seek out those opportunities, being a woman, being a female, you need to seek it out as well, or, put yourself in a position to then be able to seek it out, whether that is reaching out and finding a mentor or something like that. Be proactive as much as expecting something just to come to you.
So taking that report into consideration, Dawn, going forward, we wanted to talk about the areas of future research as well. So what are some of your thoughts on the ways that we can develop the women's game and areas that will be researched in more detail?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, if you look at the literature, there's very little on women's sport, let alone kind of women's football. So I guess my immediate response would be that everything needs to be researched. Are we comfortable and confident that we can just apply the research that we've done on male groups, male cohorts to the female population? Because, in essence, that's pretty much what we've done to date. There has been some research done, on kind of women's groups, women's cohorts. Some of it very good, some of it very much lacking in research design or methods, or very small sample sizes, which then does make it difficult to fully interpret the results. I think probably in terms of where would be the key ones, I think, match demands, I think we still, don't fully know. Myself, Rick Lovell, my PhD supervisor, we had a paper out earlier this year on some of the NWSL kind of match data. Again, there's very limited data on, some of the elite women's football division. So, I think even then, we don't fully know the WSL match demands, the women's championship in the England, match demands. So I think, that's one. I think the other piece is, what are optimal training loads and training methods for females? I think that's probably generally across the football population in terms of what are those optimal training loads for performance. And then I think, injury surveillance and then linking in the training exposure, again, I think is a big one. I don't think there's been a lot done out there on women's football. And, even this year alone, in terms of ACL injuries, I think in the Swedish Women's Pro League, they've had 12 ACL injuries, and 6 of those happened in the pre-season. Then 6 have happened in the first 6 rounds of matches. And then in that NWSL tournament, they've had 7 ACL injuries in 2 months. So, even that, like, what is the mechanism? What's the cause? Again, linked into that, there's been talk about what role does a menstrual cycle have in ACL injuries, and the honest answer right now is we don't know. There's just been 2 meta-analyses done on the impact of the menstrual cycle on performance, and the overarching conclusion is that actually we don't know, because the research design and methods have not been done that well. So further research is needed, and around the menstrual cycle, some of the key focus right now is really individualize it, monitor the individual player, determine what their symptoms are, and then just manage those symptoms. And that's what I did. In the US, we educated the players in the last 6-8 months in the lead up to the World Cup. We highlighted what some of their key symptoms were, and then we worked with individual players to minimize the impact of those symptoms on their performance. And that was purely done through nutrition, diet, recovery strategies, and then sleep. So, I think on the menstrual cycle, I think it's important. It's an area to address, to educate, to support players, to support them individually. But very much we need to do more research about everything I've just mentioned there, like match demands, training loads, injury surveillance, and training exposure. What actually is the impact of the menstrual cycle? Because every single day of a woman's menstrual cycle, the hormones are fluctuating, they're changing. Estrogen has an impact in most processes in the body, and it fluctuates, it changes throughout your cycle. So again, what is the impact of that? Can we just apply the methods that we use in the men's game? That's probably what I've done. I've adapted those methods, but based them on the individual player. But really, we don't fully have that research to fully know, if that is affected by the menstrual cycle, and by being kind of a female and the female physiology.
Yeah, and with all those that you talk about, obviously the progress of the women's game so far, without any of that taking place, it's just exciting, isn't it? That you think of all these areas that can be researched, and if you think about 5-10 years time, like where things could be, it's very exciting, isn't it? It must be great in your role.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's exciting how far it's come, but I think it's, like you say, it's really exciting how far it can still develop and push, especially the funding from FIFA, the FIFA president. And I just think the increase in support and professionalism of players and leagues, the players now being in better training environments, the better support around them, the better education. The increase in participation numbers can then only serve to increase the competitiveness. And suddenly, if there's 2.4 million females in England participating in football, as they progress through the pathway, you're going to have more players competing for spots in the national team spots and so on. And I think that is going to be massive for England in the next 4 or 5 years in terms of the competitions that they've got coming up.
And then to take it full circle, to talk about the practitioner as well, that everything looking forward, that these opportunities, again, like we talked about throughout the episode, they're going to be available if you're willing to seek them out, isn't it? So taking into consideration everything that you've talked about, I think it's a great time to be getting involved and coming through into these roles. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And even FIFA Pro, which supports is almost a I can't think of the word. They basically support the players, and they did a bit of a questionnaire and research with the players. And some of the feedback is that still some players are not in those environments that are conducive to their performance. So yeah, I think with some of this fund and moving forward, I think those will be the areas that will be addressed. And yeah, there'll absolutely be more opportunities available in women's football for those positions to support the players and the teams.
Brilliant. Well done. I think this has been a top podcast. I've really enjoyed speaking to you about everything that we talked about, and I hope we've covered everything that we sort of set out to in the first place and answered a lot of questions that have been put out to us, which I'm sure you have. So I really do appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Just finally, if there's anywhere that people want to follow your work or keep up to date with what you've got going on, where's the best place to do that?
Probably Twitter. My handle is DawnScott06. That's probably the main place that I would post anything.
Perfect. Well, we'll put that in the show notes so people can give you a follow. I'm sure they are already, but and keep an eye out with everything going on. But